There is like a write-on. Dude, I opened this thing.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Please note that this event is being recorded. My name is Frank Fusco, and I'm one of the co-presidents of the Harvard Law School of Republicans. The Harvard Law School of Republicans exists to promote conservative ideas and values across the law school campus. We are honored to be joined here today by Senator Rick Santorum. Senator Santorum earned his bachelor's degree in political science from Penn State University, his MBA from the University of Pittsburgh, and his law degree from the Dickinson School of Law. He entered public service in 1990 when he was elected to represent Pennsylvania's 18th congressional district in the U.S. House of Representatives. There, he gained national attention as being a part of the Gang of Seven, a group of reform-minded Republicans who exposed the House banking scandal and pushed for greater accountability in Congress. He served 2 terms in the House before going on to run in a competitive race for the U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania, getting elected in 1994 and serving until 2007. Both as a senator and representative, Santorum was a leading voice on issues including welfare reform, national security, healthcare policy, and social policy. In the Senate, for example, he introduced the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, which prohibited partial birth abortions nationwide and was signed into law in 2003. He was also an author of the 1996 Welfare Reform Act, which imposed work requirements on welfare programs and gave states greater control over welfare spending. These are just 2 of the many accomplishments Senator Santorum had in Congress. He ran for president of the United States in both 2012 and in 2016. In 2012, he won 11 states and 4 million votes in the Republican primary, finishing runner-up to then the former governor of Massachusetts, Mitt Romney. Since leaving office, Senator Santorum has remained active in public life, serving as a political commentator, first with CNN and now with Newsmax. Please join me in welcoming Senator Rick Santorum.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. I know it's not necessarily the best time to come and hear somebody, but I was last night. Frank reached out to us a couple weeks ago and asked me to come here, and normally I wouldn't make a special trip, no offense, to come up, but I was speaking last night in Nashua at a Republican event up there, and I said, well, if you're available the next morning, I'm staying overnight in Boston and flying out the next morning so I could take a later flight if you guys are willing to do this, so thank you for willing to do this, and that's great. I'm going to give a few brief remarks, and then one of the things I'd love to do is just sort of interact, take questions, so hopefully you can do that. They asked me what I wanted to talk about, and I said, I have a free reign. I'll always talk about, to me, what's the most important thing in life, and I went to law school, and I worked illegally, I was told at the time, but I worked full-time as a chief of staff for a state senator and went to law school full-time. So I know what it's like to be a law student, particularly a first-year law student, when you have first-year law student responsibility and managing the Senate office and working full-time. So I understand you've got a lot of things on your mind, and probably the least of which is what's important in life, because right now, only thing important in life is this, right? And I think maybe having someone come in and maybe give you a little perspective might be helpful. Before I get into that, though, a couple of weeks ago, I was asked to come and speak at the Yale Political Union. I know I hate to use that word Yale here, and I've had the opportunity to do that a couple of times. They've asked me to come up and talk to them, and I just want to. I was asked to talk about prayer in school. Which I'm not for, but they asked me to come and talk for it. I said I won't, but I'll come and talk against it, and because I wouldn't trust our educators to what kind of prayer they would actually come up with if we actually had prayer in school. But I started the talk out talking about the importance of God in our country, because prayer in a vacuum is a good thing, but in America it's uniquely important because prayer is a recognition of the importance of the Almighty. And I said, I'd start out, and I'll do the same thing with you. How many people in this room do not agree with this statement? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How many don't agree with that statement? Okay, so there's about 300 kids at Yale, and I asked that question, and about 20 hands went up that they did not agree with that statement. And I said, I have another question for you. Same question to you. How many of you don't believe in God? Raise your hand if you don't believe in God. Okay, none of you raised your hand. At Yale, half the crowd. Half of the people there. Now this is the Yale Political Union, so it's folks on the right, it's folks on the left, and it's people very interested in politics. Obviously, it's the Yale Political Union, and they're here to talk about politics and debate. I said, so square this with me. Only 20 of you raised your hand saying you don't believe in what I quoted, but half of you don't believe in God. How could you believe in God-given rights if you don't believe in God? And I said, then I asked the question, can you tell me, any of you tell me where that statement comes from? I kid you not. Silence. Complete silence, 300 people. And I said, well, can you raise your hand if you think you know where that statement comes from? 15 hands went up. Literally. 15 hands out of 300. And so I said, okay. So I pointed at the kid in the first row. He had a Focus shirt on, which I don't know if you know what Focus is. It's a Catholic group that, evangelizes in the school. So I thought, kid with the Focus shirt, he'll know what that is. Pointed to him, he froze. Couldn't answer. And then finally, after about 10 uncomfortable seconds, someone said Declaration of Independence. And I share that with you in that here we are at one of the most elite institutions in the country. Half of the kids don't believe in God, and none of them have any idea of what the founding principle of our country is, right? That is a problem, right? It's a problem for our country. These are the leaders of the free world. I mean, these are kids from Yale. They're gonna have significant role in the future of our society, and they have no idea what America's about. And they have no faith in God, which is, if you don't have faith in God, it's hard to believe in God-given rights as opposed to government-given rights, which is what the left is purveying our society. So I left there very troubled. So when I had the opportunity to come and talk to you, I thought, okay, I'm getting a biased crowd because I'm here talking to Republicans and FedSoc people, and I get that. But I just need a little affirmation that there is some hope in the future for our country. Because after leaving Yale, I didn't feel much that way, to be very honest with you. And so I thought I would share with you sort of my thinking on what's important in life, and then we can open up to whatever we want to talk about. And so the first question I have for you, because I like this question, is, why are you here? And of course, you're all going to say, well, I want to be a great lawyer, and I want to do that. I'm not asking you why you're here at Harvard. I'm asking you why you're here, period. Right? Why are you here? What's your mission? Why are you existing? What is your call in your life? What's it about? I don't know if you've ever heard these numbers. It's actually true. I got a blackboard. I didn't even know they had blackboards anymore. This is really great. And chalk. This is so cool. It brings me back to my grade school days. So, anybody know how many atoms there are in the universe? 10 to the 80th. That's how many atoms there are in the universe. Do you know the chance of you being here, alive, existing? You know what the chance is? That's the chance that you exist. That all the things from the original celled organism to today, that you would exist, is 10 to the 258 million. You are, by any definition, a miracle. The fact that just your parents met each other is like 10 to the something, like, well, excuse me, 1 in 20 million. That your parents would meet and that they would have intercourse at the very moment that we think about all the things that your grandparents met. And you go back through history and you think, the probability that you would exist is a miracle. Why do I say that? Well, all of you believe in God. And if you look at the probability that you would exist, I think it's pretty clear that somehow or other somebody had a plan that you exist. Because this doesn't happen by, if it's random chance, so you exist because you are someone that God wanted to be created. And so my question to you is, why are you here? Because I look at it as, and this is something that I frankly came to much later in my life. I wish I had thought about this earlier, which is, I remember as a kid, I grew up as a Catholic, still am a Catholic, but I remember that one of the things we got taught when I was young was, who is God? And, you talk about that, and that God is love and all that kind of great stuff. And what are you here? So I'm here to know, love, and serve the Lord, so I can be with you in the next. That's what the Catholic mantra was, to know, love, and serve the Lord. I thought that's really nice, but is that really what it's about? And the answer is actually it is. Your purpose in life, that God created you, and He created you for a purpose. All of you have a particular mission in life. And one of the things I found out is that that mission is something, Frank talked about some of the things I accomplished. Most of those things I accomplished sort of after I figured out why I was there, what my mission was. I was a very ambitious guy. Obviously, I went to law school and worked for a state senator at the same time. I ran for Congress when I was 31 years old. I'd never run for anything. I ran against a 14-year incumbent, had no chance of winning. Nobody wanted to run. No one had gotten more than 37% of the vote against this guy. It was a bad election year. It was midterm, first George Bush. It was right after he raised taxes and did all these things that made him really unpopular. Republicans, that I went in 1991, and ready for this, there were 166 Republicans. We had a 100-seat majority when I went in. It was almost impossible for Republicans to win that election, and I won. I got outspent 4-1, and I won. And you would think, well, maybe at that point you'd sort of realize that was somewhat of a miracle. And it was, and everybody thought it was a miracle, but I didn't really think of it in terms of a spiritual miracle. I thought, well, I really worked hard, and I really did this, and it's I. And in 1992, if you think about 92 to 2022, there were redistricting years. It's after the census. Pennsylvania, not surprisingly, lost a seat that year, because we've been losing seats every 10 years for 60 years. So we lost a seat, and whose seat did we lose? Mine. They eliminated my seat, because I went in there, and as Frank mentioned, I became a troublemaker. I formed a group called the Gang of Seven with a guy you might have heard of, John Boehner. John Boehner and I formed this group, and we blew up Congress. We exposed scandals. We went to the floor. A fellow member of mine had to put a bag over his head. He was so embarrassed to be a congressman. And we shook things up, and as a result, both parties wanted to get rid of me. So they put me in a district that was the last person who ran in that district got 20-something. Again, 75% of this guy's district. The guy had been in 28 years and ended up running against somebody else because he didn't want to run against me. Because I was this hard-charging reformer that people on both sides thought, wow, this is a pretty cool guy. And I ran. They had 9 people running against me in the primary. They picked somebody, and I beat. And George Bush in my district in 1992 got 29% of the vote. I got 61. So, again, another miracle, if you will. It was a 70% Democratic district. And so, after I left, which I did in 1994, we won. Republicans picked up like 11 Senate seats. We picked up like 70-some seats in the House. We lost my district. Okay? It was a tough district. In fact, it's never been won back. So I share that with you, and then I run against another incumbent Democrat, and I win. It wasn't until I came to the United States Senate that I realized I had time. I had 6 years, and I realized, why am I here? I mean, I'm 36 years old. I'm nobody. My dad was an immigrant. My grandfather was a coal miner. My dad was a government worker. I had no money. I won races I wasn't supposed to win. Everything just sort of worked. And I realized that maybe there's something bigger here going on that I don't realize what's going on. Now, I share my story, and you say, well, that's a pretty incredible story, that's it. But each one of you have your own story about how you got to Harvard Law School and the likelihood of that happening and the likelihood of you having the life you have. And it's not that kind of likelihood. It's a lot higher likelihood of that. But the reality is, You've been given a tremendous gifts. Obviously, you have tremendous minds, or you wouldn't be here. You have all the right motivations and incentives to be successful in America and to be the best at what you're doing. And the question is, you've been getting, I don't know if you still know the story of the Bible, the story of the talents. You know, somebody's given 1 talent, someone's given 3, someone's given 5. You've been given 5. You're a 5-talent person, right? And the Bible says, to whom much is given, much is expected. And then some interpretations, one I like the best, which is, to whom more is given, more is required. Well, by any measure, you're the more, right? You're the top. You've been given the most. That means you're required, not just expected, but required. If the bar for eternal glory is here, yours is here. Not only have you been given more, but you live in the greatest country in the history of the world. You live in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. If you go back to the billions of people who have lived in the world, you are the 0.00001% of people who have been given material things in your life. Material, both your mind, your health, and the situation you live in. So I share that with you is that you're special. You're incredibly special. And I know you've been told this in many ways, but I'm not thinking in the ways that the world tells you you're special. I'm thinking of the way as what your mission is and your obligation is, given the great gifts you've given. And you've heard Charlie Kirk say this, and you know, when he sort of came to a conclusion. I knew Charlie when he was 18, 19 years old, and Charlie was not much of a believer then. He was not much of a Christian then. He was not much of anything then other than a very energetic, hard-driving guy who had a plan. And he was very bright, you could tell that. But over time, he changed, had a little bit of a role in that. And one of the things he realized, I think, the come to Jesus moment was that there is a God and I'm not him. And you say, well, that's not a big deal. But yeah, it really is a big deal. Because the biggest problem America has, the biggest problem we have in this country, and is the first commandment, right? Which is, there is a God, and he is God, and you're not God. And that everything else is a false God. If you don't put him in first, then you have all these false gods. This could be money, it could be this, it could be sex, it could be a lot of things. But most of the people put themselves as the role of God. And when Charlie came to realize that, when I came to realize that, my life changed. And I realized that everything I have is from him. Everything I have is from him. And that my mission is to do his will. And if I do his will, I'm doing it for someone who, out of that probability, created me. Because he wanted to create me. You're an intentional creation. He intended you to be here. And he gave you those gifts. You say, well, I worked hard. Yeah, he gave you all that. Everything. None of this you owe. And I know that's a hard thing to come around because you guys are really special and you've accomplished so much. And you can look at people and say, well, they didn't do this and that. Praise God, right? And that would be the thing that I would try to leave with you, is that one of the greatest detriments or deficiencies, the word I'm looking for, that we have in America is humility. And I know there's not much of it around here. I guarantee you there's not much of it around here. And I understand there's a reason for it, but that's the world, right? That's the world telling you that. The humility that none of this is really you. All of this is a gift. If you get that right? If you get that right, then you're going to do great things in this world. And I mean great things in this world, and I don't mean, well, you're going to be a Supreme Court justice, which, you know, someone in this room could be. But you're going to do great things in the things that matter, and in serving him. So I always tell people, I can tell you story after story, and I don't have time because I want to take questions, but the thing that I realized in my faith journey, and I really came to faith in the United States Center when I was in my late 30s, is when I really sort of figured it out. And I figured out something that God was never really in the middle of my life. He really wasn't the center of my life. He was sort of over here. I went to church. I did all the things. I could check the box, say, yeah, I'm a believer. I could check all the boxes the right way. But I didn't live my life for him or for his will or for my relationship with Jesus. That was not what I did. And once I changed that, and I figured out this, that God speaks in whispers, and unless you're close, you're never going to hear what he really wants for you. And so I encourage you to pray. I encourage you to think about intentionally the importance of faith and importance of your miracle that your life is, the fact that he's given you all these gifts. And I can play the heavy, which is your bar's higher than everybody else, but that's sort of the stick. The carrot is God loved you so much to give you so much. Why wouldn't you use the things he gave you, right? Why wouldn't you just say, thank you, Lord, and do something with it? And I don't mean just your career. And a final point I will say is about things important. I was a congressman, I was a senator, I ran for office, ran in 2012, almost became the president. I mean, should have become the president. And I look back at, here I am, 67 years old. I've got 10 grandchildren. The oldest grandchild is 3. My kids, I had 8 kids. 5 of my kids are married. I got a bunch of kids. They're all great, faithful, believing kids. That's the most important thing in my life. It is. I mean, there's just nothing better. I hate to, Charlie Kirk's a big thing, but he's right. I mean, I told this to him 10 years ago. Faith is the most important thing in your life. Get married, have kids. Final thing I'll say is, you guys are great and probably someday going to be important people in our society. But everything you do, even within your family, within a few generations, is going to be lost. I mean, can you name who your great-great-grandfather is on your mom's side? No, you can't. You're going to be lost to the generations. Very little, again, you may be a chance there, you may be present someday, and so you'll be in a history book. And so you'll be a picture in a history book, and you may do something important. And you might be that 0.00001% that actually has something that might live on. But most of you are not. So if you think about it, all the things you do in your life, there's only one thing you will do that is eternal. One thing. And we know what that one thing is? Cooperate with God to create an immortal soul. Get married, have kids. That soul will live forever. And that soul will have other immortal souls that will live forever. That's it. That's your lasting contribution to the world. Everything else goes away. That, you participate in creating one of those, right? You participate in a miracle, and God will bless that miracle. I'd be happy to take your questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for being here and for giving a talk that I definitely wasn't expecting, but needed. You talked about both humility and also acknowledge that you yourself are a very ambitious person throughout your career. How do you kind of think about the interaction between humility and ambition, and how have you, in practice, tried to have both of those?
Yeah. How many Catholics in the room? Just curious, just so I know who I'm talking to. Okay, not very many, but that's good. A few, enough. Have any of you ever heard of the prayer of humility? Raise your hand if you've ever heard of the litany of humility. It's technically called litany of humility. Hardest prayer in the world. Google it, look it up, read it, pray it. Good luck. Good luck praying that prayer. If you can say honestly that when you pray that prayer that you will everything that prayer asks you to will, to pray, and ask God for, you are a great person. You are a humble person. I have never been able to say that prayer and mean it. Never. Can't do it. Hard. Really hard. It's like Donald Trump getting up at Charlie Kirk's funeral and says, yeah, Erica says, I forgive him. Trump says, no, I'm not forgiving anybody. I can't forgive that guy. I'm not forgiving anybody. Right? Humility is the same thing. I mean, it's hard. It's really hard. But it's so important. You know who prays that prayer every day? A friend of mine, you might know. His name is Clarence. Clarence prays that prayer every day. And I asked him, I said, how can you do that? He says, I can't say I believe it, but I'm trying. That's humility on itself, right? To sit there and subject yourself and to read something that in your heart you say, no, I really don't want that. And yet you pray it and you ask for the grace to have it, right? And that's really what it's about, is particularly in this world, in the world you live in, humility is just really, really hard. But it is absolutely essential that you pray that he increase in your life and you decrease. That's really the ultimate prayer of humility. Doing God's will. And you say, well, why would I? When people pray for things, I'm sure you've prayed, maybe some of you haven't, but most of you prayed, you ask for, that I get into Harvard Law School, or that, that I meet the right girl or gal or whatever, or man, or whatever it is. You pray for things, and I did too. I did for the longest time. I always pray for things. And people say it's not a bad thing to pray. I've stopped doing that, right? And here's my rationale for why I've stopped doing that. I pray for God's will, and that I know God's will, and that I seek that will. You say, well, why would you do that? He may not want you to go to Harvard Law School, and I want to go to Harvard Law School, and I think that's best for me. So here's my understanding. It took me a while to figure this one out, which is, okay, I love my wife. I love my children, right? I mean, those are my great loves, right? But here's the reality. God loves them more than I did, right? Because God's love is perfect. I'm not perfect. I have an imperfect love. I may love my wife for reasons that maybe aren't the most pure of reasons, right? So, and the same thing with my kids for ones, maybe I want them to do something for me. And so God's love is pure, it's perfect. So, I take it one step further, I love myself, but God loves me more than me, right? Because again, he has perfect love. He is love. So if God's love for me is greater than me, why wouldn't I want God's will for me? Since he loves me more perfectly than I do. And so that's sort of the simple thing with me, which is, if God loves me perfectly and wants what's best for me, which he does, because if you love someone, you want the best for them, why wouldn't I want his will instead of mine? Because my will is, I see the world like this, he sees this. He sees it all. He sees, well, this, if he actually got what he asked for, might lead him to something that's going to take him off the path to heaven, or take him off the path to find the woman that he needed to meet, to have the children he needed to have. So I encourage you all, and again, it's an act of humility, that you don't know what's best for you, to pray that God does what's best for you, that you're able to discern that, and discern his will and do what's right. That is a start, in my opinion, that to me was the start of humility. Is that basic understanding of your fallibility, right? And we all have it. We don't like to admit it, but we do. And once you recognize that, you're on the path. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Jin, and as a Christian who's interested in doing politics, do you see some tension between the nature of the political office and the process of getting elected versus being a pious Christian? Meaning, I don't know the specifics, but I've seen like House of Cards to know that there will be times when you have to make a decision along the way to get to where you need to be versus your moral values and God's values. Do you see any tension between that? And then the nature of being a politician is that you want the country to be great as is today, but as a Christian, we're also simultaneously waiting for the kingdom to come,
Yeah.
knowing that before that happens, the world will become chaos.
Yeah, two good questions. Let me answer the last one first. Yeah, I'm never someone, I don't think God wants us to think about the end times, right? As Jesus said, no one knows, only God knows. He was God, only God knows, right? So if Jesus here on earth says we don't know when that is going to come, we can't be fixated on that. I know there's a lot of religious sects that really focus on end times. I think that's a dangerous thing to do. It's not biblical, and it frankly doesn't make sense because you don't know. And so I think what God called us to do is to understand there's a difference between the kingdom and earth, and give unto Caesar what is Caesar. And so you have your obligations to Caesar. You have your obligations to this world, to your children, to your wife, to your family, to your community, and yes, to your country. And I always felt like the idea that you sort of checked your religion and your values at the door and then you got into politics was ridiculous. Why? Because everybody has a set of moral values. I used to be criticized all the time, it's way before your time when I was very active in politics, but I was probably one of the most vilified people in the public media when I was in the United States Senate, when I ran for president. Not level of Trump, but pretty close. Certainly at the time it was considered such. And I never let it bother me, because to me the most important thing was to do God's will, to try to do what you felt was the right thing to do. And I use that term very, very cautiously, you felt, because the left is always, oh, it's how you feel. And yeah, I mean, we should use our conscience, but your conscience has to be well formed and has to be formed based on a certain set of moral principles, right? And I was always very transparent about what those principles were. I always was very transparent. I'm a Catholic. I believe what the Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches. I believe the Bible to be true, and that is the moral foundation of how I make my decisions. Now, I was called a theocrat over and over again throughout the course of my political career. They had a meme, excuse me, I turned that on. I had a meme going on way back when, before memes were a thing, that I was one of the great minds of the 13th century. Okay? And back to the 13th century, and that's Thomas Aquinas, so I'm thinking, yeah, I'm good. I'm good with one of the great minds of the 13th century. But that's, I mean, I was ridiculed for the positions I took and how I looked at things, but I was perfectly fine with that, right? And I was willing, always willing to lose for the things I cared about, right? And the biggest problem in politics is you compromise what the truth for to win. Well, what do you win, right? If you compromise the things that are important in life to get in there, then what are you accomplishing? And so I just really felt comfortable not to do that. And so the other thing is they would say, well, he's a theocrat, he's trying to impose his moral values. And I remember having debates with John Kerry and others, and said, okay, what are your values? If it's not based on this, tell me what you base your moral code on. And of course the answer would be what? What do you think they'd say? Well, what I think is right. Based upon what foundational principle of what's right and wrong? Where do you come up with what's right? Well, I look at things, I analyze them, and I think this is right. I mean, that's just garbage. That's just garbage. Everybody gets their moral code from something external other than what's right. That formation of what in your mind is right and wrong comes from something. The other side simply refuses to admit what it is, right? And I don't. I'm transparent about it. Or they don't even know. Part of the time is they don't even know where their sense of right, where their formation comes from. We all are formed. You're not born with a sense of right and wrong, right? And so, I mean, if you had little kids, you'd see that, right? You'd see that they have no concept, of what's right and wrong. And you teach them, you form them based upon certain moral, ethical codes. Mine comes from God and from the catechism. That's where I come from. And so if you're in a debate with somebody, just say, okay, if you think I'm a theocrat, what is the foundation of your moral ecology? And they will not answer. And if they say, well, I just think this, so you're the God. You're the creator of the moral code, and society should go along with your moral code, which has 50 years of foundation, right? As opposed to something's been around for, 10 Commandments, like 6,000 years, right? So we use more of your moral code and abandon 6,000 years of moral code. We have to be just more aggressive in articulating what the alternative to what, this Judeo-Christian mindset that has been successful in Western civilization for 2,000 years. Yes, sir.
This is maybe a little further afield, but I'm curious,
Good.
About, because we're all trying to be lawyers here, right, at Harvard
Good,
Law.
that's a good thing.
Yeah, well, it's sort of like celebrating the birth of new snakes or something like that.
I don't see that.
But I'm curious, like, lawyers have this perception of being sort of amoral, mercenary types. You go to some big firm and you're asked to, to just kind of, at best, you're defending something that you don't really care about, like, Walmart or something. Worst, you're, scamming grandmothers out of slip and falls or something like that. And we have this kind of story we tell in America about John Adams and the Boston Massacre. And I think a lot of times people kind of, let's say, struggle with connecting personal morality and even what they want in politics, even if you have conservative views, and the kind of drudgery of law firms and this kind of like mercenary mindset.
Okay,
How do
so
you
why
think
are you
those
here?
two things
I'm just
connect?
curious. I mean, you just described a very unattractive field of work, and yet here you are, right? So I don't think it's as unattractive as you say. Look, I didn't like it. I practiced law for 5 years. I was at the firm now is K&L Gates. I was at Kirkpatrick and Lockhart, and I did a lot of those things, and I questioned myself whether, defending PNC Bank was really what was my thing to do in life, and I decided no, it wasn't. But as I thought about it, it wasn't because of the fact that I thought I was doing something wrong, right? So the concept that everybody, every corporation, everybody deserves to be defended, or their rights to be defended, is not wrong, right? So you're defending a drug dealer. You're not defending the drug dealer. You're defending the rights of someone in the legal system. That's what you're doing, right? Now, if you do things that are immoral and against, legal ethics, then you've got a problem. But and by the way, you may not be the best lawyer for that drug dealer, because there may be the best lawyer in the sense of trying to get him to, be successful. But your job is not necessarily to zealously defend your client, but not to break legal, codes of ethics to do so he wins. It's not win at all costs. It's win according to the rules. And if you're in a firm that says break the rules to win, get out of that firm, right? But the idea of having a rule of law based society and lawyers there to transact in that environment is a good thing, right? The problem is we have increasing numbers of lawyers and judges who see a results-based judicial system as opposed to a laws and rules-based judicial system. And so that is something to fight for. It's something important to be in that system and fight against the Ketanji Brown Jacksons, who don't see the law as an arbiter, impartial arbiter, but in fact a mechanism to advance a political agenda, right? Or to go back to the law firm, or a law firm that simply wants to win so they can get money and doesn't really pay attention to the rules, right? So, yeah, having good, honorable lawyers, even doing things that I didn't feel like that's what God was calling me to do, that he was calling me to do something more, and I found that I actually had a gift in the area of politics and speaking and things like that, and so it just wasn't fulfilling for me. And at the time, frankly, yeah, I just got married, but I'll be honest with you, I mean, family was okay. It wasn't the most important thing in my life. It wasn't. I mean, I was one of these career guys. I was gonna take on the world, and that's what God was calling me to do. Was I much of a prayerful person? No, but I knew that's what God wanted me to do because it's what I wanted to do. So therefore, it was what God wanted me to do. Right? So I learned later that was not necessarily true, but God thankfully is very forgiving, and it all worked out fine.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I think that there's pretty substantial pressure, especially at institutions like Harvard, to focus on putting your career above all else to the point where everything else just kind of falls by the wayside, and that's the general understanding of how things should be. So I'm kind of curious what your practical advice is towards kind of reorienting your life back towards the things that should matter.
So look, I don't want to tell you if you're a 1L that you should spend all your time outside of the law school and do all this. I mean, you're going to fail, right? And so no one's going to fail, right? And so I went through, look, my first year in law school when I was working full time, my schedule was I had literally zero time. I would take one Friday night every 2 weeks, and I would do something outside of the grind of what I was doing. That was it. That was my total life. I wasn't married, I wasn't dating, I wasn't dating anymore. And so I just sort of, that's your time in your life, right? And there's nothing wrong with committing yourself to something. I mean, you obviously have the talent and the ability to do something like this, and it's a rare privilege in our society to get an education like this and be able to come out of this school and do a lot of really great things. And so you're in a very brief period of time in your life, and trust me, it's a couple of years, and out of 80, to prepare yourself to be able to do great things in the future. So I'm not going to argue that you need to balance your life as a 1L, right? You don't. You need to survive, and you need to thrive if you can in doing that. But then you have to recognize that's not your life, right? Your life is not just, okay, I'm going to keep doing that for the rest of my life. You're going to be a very miserable person. You're not going to be a happy person. And so, now that I thought about that, I mentioned the Declaration of Independence, which I say is our birth certificate, is that phrase in the Declaration. And I love that. I always focused on that when I was in politics and talked about it a lot. And then I realized sort of that I was left a little hollow by that statement. Because if you think about it, they talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I thought, okay, I was a big pro-life guy, and I thought, okay, life obviously is foundational. If you're not alive, nothing matters, right? So if you don't have the right to live, nothing matters. So that's obviously the foundational right. Liberty, obviously for us here in America, and I think for the human person, the freedom, the freedom to be able to, to live your life in a way that's consistent with what God is calling you to do is, at least that's the way I looked at it, but just the freedom to have certain basic rights, right? And that being the right of freedom made sense as number 2. Then I got to number 3, the pursuit of happiness. I don't know about you, but would you like on your tombstone, here's life's Frank, he was happy, right? I mean, is that really the highest calling? I mean, here our founders are thinking about life, liberty, big things, right? Happiness. Is that a big thing? I mean, I don't know. I grew up in an Italian immigrant family. My dad didn't care if I was happy. He never cared if I was happy, right? What's a kid happy? I don't care if he's happy. Is he doing this? Is he doing that, right? So I always thought, it really troubled me. I don't know if it ever, anybody, I mean, maybe I'm alone in this. Anybody troubled by that happiness thing? No. Nobody ever troubled by that? To me, it was troubling. Like this great enterprise is about happiness, right? No, it should be about really big, important things, and happiness not being one of them. So that bothered me for a while. And I don't know why, I took it upon myself, I don't know what caused me to do this. But I went back and said, okay, I gotta understand this. And I did a little reading and about the founding, about that phrase. And so I found myself going to the dictionary definition of happiness at the time of the founding. Well, obviously there was no dictionary, American dictionary at the time of the founding, but the first one was like 40 years later, which was Noah Webster's original dictionary. And so I went to it and I looked up the definition of happiness, and there were 3 definitions that I recall. And it was the second one, which basically said, happiness comes about from doing God's will in your life. That the only way you can truly be happy is to live your life consistent with what God wants you to do. And I started reading some more, and I found out that, in fact, many of the founders saw happiness as not the happiness we think of, happy, but as living life that would make you truly happy. And you've heard the term slave to sin. Sin won't make you happy. That living a good and virtuous life is how you are happy. And that what he said, the pursuit of happiness is the right to do what God has called you to do. That a society that allows you to pursue God's will in your life is a society that has the ultimate rights. And that instead of a government dictating to you how to live your life. So now you can look at the pursuit of happiness maybe a little differently. Anyways, that was a little bit of a rabbit hole. Go ahead, yes.
I think this leads well into like kind of what I'd like to ask you about the evolution of the right. Because I think that you're right to point out that like our end goal very much is to worship God in our lives and to see God as good. And as you notice, everyone in this room didn't raise their hand when you asked, does that
I noticed
God? And so it's definitely a
Not representative of Harvard Law School.
No, definitely not. But I think all of us would agree with that in different forms. And we are worried about like our country worshiping God, following God. And I think that the evolution of the right has been kind of maybe saying that's awesome and wonderful, and there is a system like a government that's established to be able to have a process to which we all have a say and which we uphold equal rights and all these other things. But then there's also this growing side of it, I should say, where it's like, well, those things haven't actually led us towards God. We've seen our generation, we've seen generations before us slowly walk away. We've seen our culture become what it is. We've seen this institution become what it is today. And so I think there's a lot of desire to kind of up the stakes, change the game. And that's definitely like a big source of it.
Change the game how?
Well, by change the game, I think it's literally what you're describing Ketanji Brown Jackson doing, we do it. I think that's the return argument.
So what do you win?
What do you win? I think that's exactly the question I'd ask of you. Is how do you respond
Well,
to
thing,
that?
right? Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, right? So you play the game of positive law, that there aren't inalienable rights, and that we don't have to really respect those rights, that people will be able to choose the wrong thing, and that we have all the knowledge of what the right thing is, and therefore we should impose that on everybody else. That's the game, right? That's the Ketanji Brown Jackson game. Not a good game. We don't win that game in the end. The bad guys win that game. They're really good at that. We really aren't. Because we still have a lot of Christians in America who will not play that game. Trump may play that game. He's trying to play that game in many respects. And a lot of folks are going along with it, sort of. I think you hear there's a lot of quiet angst among conservatives as to how Trump is playing that sort of, and, I saw the signs as I walked over here, about authoritarian Trump and all that kind of stuff. The king, right? No kings today. And that's crazy, but it's not. Because, of course, it's crazy because the left does that 100 times more than Donald Trump does. But what you're saying is true, that there's an increasing number of conservatives, Trump being one of them, who thinks we need to play that game back. And we're tired of losing. Matt Walsh is the great example. He's a big Catholic, but he's saying, I'm tired of losing and we have to do this. No. Now then you lose by winning, because if the rule of law isn't what we're all about, then then we're in a game of power, pure power, Machiavellian politics. And we ain't gonna win that game. You know, if we're all about not upholding the basic rule of law and doing bad things to accomplish good ends, the people who use bad things to accomplish bad ends are much better at the bad things than we are. And we will not have our side united because there's too many of us, me and many, many, many others, who aren't gonna participate in that game. So we're gonna be fractured and they're gonna be united and we'll lose. So don't go down that road. That's my 2 cents. Does that make sense? So I'm not, I can talk from about it, whether it's the right thing to do, but I'm just saying the practical politics of it, we're not gonna win that game. So, I mean, that shouldn't be the reason you don't do it necessarily, but if I can't convince you that it's the wrong thing to do, I'll try to convince you it's not the winning thing to do, right?
Yeah, I have a sort of similar question. I do feel like this is a phenomenon on the right and the left of politicians invoking their faith and then doing things that are very unchristian. And I feel like it is a problem of using your faith as a political tool rather than what it is, which is trying to do good.
Okay, give me an example of that.
For me, I don't think that the Trump administration, a lot of their
Okay,
actions.
well, first off,
I can
stop
give you
right there.
examples.
Stop right there. Donald Trump does not invoke faith. Donald Trump is not a Christian. He admits he's not a Christian. So I don't think you can use Donald Trump as an example of someone invoking the Christian faith.
Okay, I can give you another example.
So try somebody
Sure.
else. Try me. If you can find something, try me. I do that.
I can give a few other examples. I think the situation in Palestine has moved beyond the realm of self-defense and is, for me, very unethical. I see people invoking the idea of Judeo-Christian values. I mean, obviously,
Well, obviously
killing
they
people is
don't,
not,
right? They're Jews, not Christians.
but Christians use that too.
Well, look, I mean, so remember, the Old Testament is the eye for an eye testament. Ours is turn the other cheek, right? That's different. But it doesn't matter that those terms, if you look at them in context, it doesn't apply to governments. It applies to you, right? You're supposed to turn it. You're supposed to forgive, right? Governments can't forgive, right? Governments, that's not a personal obligation of the government. It's your requirement. And the government has a right to defend itself and to defend the integrity of its country, of the country. And so you can make the argument, it's an argument of prudential judgment as to whether the Israelis are doing more than they need to do to protect themselves from someone who has dedicated themselves to destroy the state of Israel, right? And you can make the argument, well, they don't need to completely eradicate them to get rid of the threat. And you have every right to take that opinion. But it's not an absolute right or wrong opinion. It's not a moral absolute. It's a prudential judgment. And so you have to accept as a right of prudential judgment that they have an equal right to say, no, our experience is that if we don't eliminate them, they will continue to threaten not just our state, but the people within our state. And so I have no problem with you saying, I think they've gone too far. Fine, legitimate thing to say. It's not legitimate to say they have no right to go that far, or that it's genocide to go that far, because it's an area of prudential judgment, and it's not something that you can say, well, this is morally absolutely wrong, because it's not. And when the other side refuses to accept the other person's existence and says they are committed to destroying them, the other side has a right to stop them from doing so. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this, since I think you were very lucky to serve in the House and Senate in maybe the last era where both the House and Senate were actually useful institutions. So obviously we're right now in a 3-week shutdown.
Can I stop right there?
Yes.
Because you just made an offhand remark about useful institutions. And I'm going to defend those useless institutions. And it goes back to, again, understanding your Constitution. You're lawyers, you can be lawyers, you should understand the Constitution. The Constitution was written by basically people from the states. Remember, the states established the federal government, not the other way around. So the states established the federal government to do what? Damn little. right? Enumerated powers, very limited, right? All other powers to the states and the people. That was the case in the federal government for a long, long time, right? And they put in the Constitution 2 provisions to make sure that the federal government would never be powerful. Do you know what those 2 provisions were? Really? You don't know what those 2 provisions were? To make it darn near impossible for the federal government to grow and become powerful.
Enumerated powers and.
Well, that was one. Okay, that's the provision I already discussed. You're right, they enumerated powers. But what was there to make sure they kept to it? Because they didn't just say, oh, well, we're going to give you just enumerated powers, and we know because you're really good guys, and for 200 years you're going to keep to those. No. They put safeguards in place. What were they?
You have impeachment and power of the purse.
No. Because that power of the purse is Washington itself has power, yeah.
Bicameralism and presentment.
Bicameralism gets to it. You're getting close. Go ahead.
Judicial review.
Helpful, yeah. Again, a check, but not really the big check. And judicial review was not really in the Constitution. It was sort of created later. So not going to give you credit for that. Anybody else? Really? Yeah.
The people.
Nice.
The ability for the states to come together and amend the Constitution.
1, good. I have my little badge on, Convention of States. So yes, Article 5, Section 2 allows the state legislatures to come together to call a convention to amend the Constitution outside of the power of Washington in order to contain the power of Washington. That's 1, still around. The other one, not around anymore.
Election of senators by the states.
Bingo. 17th Amendment. Look at the country prior to the 17th Amendment. Washington was an insignificant backwater town, had no deficit because they had no money. You know what the largest source of income was in 1912 before the 17th Amendment? The excise tax on alcohol. There was no income tax, there was no sales tax, there was nothing. No Social Security, no nothing. It was an insignificant part of your life. There was strife in America, but it was at the state and local level. It was not at the federal level, right? Then the 17th Amendment came around. 17th Amendment came around. Anybody know the story of the 17th Amendment? Anybody hear the term muckraker? Yellow journalism. All back in the progressive era, around the turn of the last century. And one of the agenda items of the progressives was to what? That's what do they want to do? They want to expand the power of the federal government. So they push for income tax, 16th Amendment, and they push for the 17th Amendment. And to help them get that done, the fake news of the day, the muckrakers, made up, literally in many cases, made up stories around the country of state legislators doing fraudulent things in the appointment of United States senators. All to undermine the people. They created this firestorm that this was a terrible thing, that the states could block progress, right? And so what happened was there was a grassroots movement by the progressives to get rid of popular election, to appoint popular election senators. Prior to that, as we're saying, senators were appointed by the state legislatures. You all read about the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Were Lincoln and Douglas running against each other for the United States Senate? No! What were they doing? They were out campaigning for state legislators. And they knew that the state legislator would appoint them if the state legislature controlled by Republicans, would be Lincoln, Democrats, Douglas. That's what they were campaigning for other candidates. I suspect most of you didn't know that, right? Again, understanding how our Constitution was originally structured is really important to understand what's happened. 17th Amendment passes. Do things automatically change in the Senate? No. What happened prior to, maybe a little tidbit, know a little about this as a senator. In order to get a vote in the United States Senate prior to 17, prior to 1917, how many senators had to agree to vote in order for there to be a vote in the United States Senate on anything? All of them. one senator could object and there'd be no vote. For the first 100 years, up until the late 1880s, one senator could anonymously object and there wouldn't be a vote. You didn't have to publicly object. Later on, they tried unanimous consent and someone had to stand and object. And so how many things passed? Things that had to. That's all that passed. Things that were clearly constitutional and required of the federal government to deal with, to admit a state, or to deal with an issue like slavery or whatever, or war. That's it. They didn't do much. Or if there was enormous public pressure. So, one person could say, well, I'm not going to let anything pass. Well, of course, they wouldn't be very effective as a senator. So what they did was they horse traded. They said, okay, you let me vote on this, I'll let you vote on this. And that's how they got things voted. Comes 1912, that changes, but it changed immediately? No. Why? Because only a third of the Senate was up in 1914. Then another third was up in 1916. And in 1917, they changed the rules because they had a majority. And what did they change the rules? They put in something called cloture. So cloture was a reform to actually help things pass. And they needed 40% of the Senate, 60% of the Senate, 67% of the Senate originally had to vote in favor of allowing the vote before something could be voted on. And that was changed to 60 back in 1975. So when you say ineffective, the answer is praise God, thank you. Because that's what the federal government was supposed to be. Not a place where things got done. A place where it was really hard to get anything done. I remember coming to the Senate and I had this really important thing I wanted to get done. I thought was so important. And I was so frustrated that we lost because I couldn't get 60 votes. And I remember walking back with a senator from Oregon who'd been in for almost 30 years by then. And I was complaining to him. I said, this was really, people really want this and all this kind of stuff. He said, yeah, you sound like me 30 years ago. Because I was the same way. And I was actually having this conversation with a senator from Delaware who had been there for 25 years. And he said to me, I was thinking this, I was the same way when I came. But you know what I found out? That if it's really important, if it's really something that needs to happen, it'll happen in 5 or 10 years. He said, the Senate is a place where bad ideas go to die, and good ideas take their time to be consensus ideas before they pass. That's how things are supposed to work. And when the Democrats, which I think they will, get control of the Senate, House, and President again, they will eliminate the filibuster, and we will lose our republic. They'll pack the court, guaranteed. They'll eliminate the filibuster, put 4 new justices in. They'll change the voting laws of the country to make sure that every state is like California. They will admit DC, Puerto Rico, maybe another country, another territory that is Democratic controlled, to make sure the Senate never gets back in Republican hands. They will do what the left always does, consolidate power and block opposition. So you need to be thankful that the Congress doesn't pass a lot of things. Now I know right now because they passed so much. Why? Because the courts have let them. The courts in the 1930s, as you know, just blew the doors open on the Constitution, and you guys here and originalists and others have been fighting to claw that back. I'm willing to wait. I'm willing to wait till that happens, or till I'm successful in having a convention of states so the states can do just that. And one of the things, by the way, I just gave this speech last night, that I'm out there pleading for people to do this, like New Hampshire, to pass it now. To pass and have a convention of states, the first thing I guarantee you we will put out there is an amendment to limit the Supreme Court to 9 members. If we don't do that soon, we're done. Just telling you. The country you know right now, and take it for someone who has a pretty good track record of predicting what the left's going to do. I'll give you 2 books, one called It Takes a Family, the other called Blue Collar Conservative, which I wrote 20 years ago and 10 years ago. And I saw what they were doing, I called it out, and it happened. So this is going to happen. How do I know? I have a rare gift. You know what my gift is? I listen to what the left says, and I believe them. That's my gift. So listen to what they say. Everything Ketanji Brown Jackson said, that's what they believe. And that's what they're going to do. And if you don't stop them, we're going to get there. Now you can ask your question.
Well, I guess sort of granting that it is good that Congress generally doesn't do a whole lot, it's still better when they're not doing a whole lot. Members actually care that they're attempting to do things, even if they're not successful. And I think now institutional pressures are more like having a Congress of influencers rather than anyone who's actually interested in legislation. Like there are a bunch of offices now, just known from friends from college who now work on the Hill, who literally do not have a single policy staffer. They have all press team. That's all they do. So I guess sort of from your perspective of having worked in an era where I think most people still had good intentions as far as legislation went.
Okay, so I'm going to argue with you again,
Okay.
but you're making very legitimate points. I don't want to minimize what you're making. And here's why I'm going to argue with you. Congress and the president are a reflection of the country. There are no leaders in Congress, right? They're followers. They're just followers who adeptly get in front of the crowd. And when they follow, when they lead, they do this. Where are they going? And I'm just going to stay out in front of them. Okay? So where's the public right now? Right? They're deeply divided. It's tribal. And so where's Congress? It's tribal. And you have some, I would argue, I don't agree with this, but I think some people have said, look, we're not going to get anything done here. Policy is stupid because we'll never get anybody on the other side to do anything. And we'll never get 60 votes in the Senate because they're going to block everything. So we're in a different game. We're in a game of trying to win hearts and minds and move people and motivate our base. And little known fact, I was a conservative. I was probably one of the most conservative members of Congress when I was there in the Senate. I am the last senator to win an election. It was 2000. I was the last conservative to win a state that the president of my party lost. Since then, no conservative. Now, there's been 2 senators from Maine who won, but they were not conservative. Snow and Collins. And they won, but they run against the president. So they don't run with the president. I ran with the president. I was his campaign chair. So I ran with President Bush at the time. And I won. I won by 5, he lost by 4. No one has won since. And I don't think they're going to see it happen. And in fact, the president has to win by X margin for that Republican to win. That wasn't the case. It was a different country. It was before social media. It was before, what's happened in this country is social media has enhanced the divide and has centralized all discussion around Washington. You want to heal this country? Get power out of Washington. If you look at the left and the right, Trump's doing this now. In fact, you argued for it, right? That we should use their tactics and nationalize all these issues and, have us put police in Chicago, right? Every local issue becomes a national issue. Well, if that's the case, then every divide in America becomes a national divide. Whereas if California wants to put transgenderism in their schools, okay, but don't impose it on us in Alabama. Alabama could live with that. They wouldn't like it, but they could live with it if they know that if California is okay with them not having that in there, and Alabama not trying to impose that on California. So the idea that we have a great divide in this country, we have had this country, other than the 1950s, I think that's the unique time in America, people want to harken back to it, it was not real. This country's always been greatly divided. You might look at slavery, look at all the things that went on in this country. There was always great divides, but they rarely reached the national crescendo and divided us as a nation because they were all handled in each state, in each region, in each community. Now everything is here. Everything is in Washington. Everything is heightened. Everything is talked about by everybody. And that's why I believe in convention of states to try to get that power out of Washington and restore civility in the country and letting bygones be bygones. I live in Idaho, let me do my thing. In Oregon, you do your thing, and bygones be bygones. That's how it worked for a long time. And it's not that way now.
With that, we're out of time now, so please join me in thanking Senator Rick
Sorry.
Santorum.